If you have watched Netflix Operation Safed Sagar, you already know what happened inside the cockpit. You must be aware of the pilots, the mission, the fear, and their courage. But wars aren't won inside cockpits alone. They are won in briefing rooms, in repair hangars, in intelligence labs, and sometimes in a meeting room thousands of miles away. While fighter jets were flying over Kargil, another battle was unfolding almost entirely off screen. This is that story. May 1999. Pakistani regulars had already occupied the peaks above Kargil. Indian soldiers were climbing near vertical cliffs just to take back their own ground. This is when the Air Force was finally called in. But before the first aircraft even took off, Delhi gave it one rule. A rule that could never be broken. No aircraft would cross the line of control. Not once. Not by a meter. One mistake could look like the opening move of a nuclear war. And then, there was a second problem nobody could solve just by giving an order. No Air Force ever in the world had ever fought a precision campaign at this altitude. India wasn't just entering a war, it was entering an unknown territory. Most people assume the Indian Air Force's first fight in Kargil was against Pakistan. It wasn't. Its first fight was against its own limitations. The pilots weren't short on courage, they were flying blind. No moving map display, no thermal imaging, nothing that could reliably tell a bunker from a rock. At nearly the speed of sound, over peaks that all looked exactly the same, that difference was impossible to see. The mountains exposed that weakness almost immediately. Within 48 hours, Flight Lieutenant Nachiket's MiG-27 flamed out and went down. He was taken prisoner. Squadron leader Ajay Ahuja flew lower to search for him and was shot down himself. But he didn't die in the crash. He was executed on the ground. Low altitude tactics were finished even before the war had properly begun. From that point on, every mission briefing opened with the same question. How do you destroy the target without losing another pilot? Finding that answer would reshape the way India fought this entire war. While the Netflix series follows the pilots, something else was happening inside the command rooms. The Army and the Air Force weren't fighting the same war. At least, not at first. For weeks, the intrusion was treated as a local infiltration, an infantry problem, not one for the fighter jets. While the decisions moved slowly, the enemy moved fast. Every day, new bunkers appeared, new supply routes opened. By the time fighter aircrafts entered the fight, those mountains had already become fortresses. The problems didn't end there. The army had one map, the Air Force had another. There was no shared target database, no common battlefield picture. Some early strikes reached coordinates the enemy had abandoned hours earlier. The pilots never even knew. So India built something in the middle of the war that should have existed long before it, a joint operation cell. For the first time, everyone was looking at the same battlefield. The coordination problem was solved. The joint operation cell solved one problem. Pilots finally knew where to strike. But knowing the target and hitting it were two completely different things. To stay above Pakistani shoulder-fired missiles, Indian fighters climbed above 20,000 feet. Safer for the pilots, but far less accurate for the bombs. At that altitude, gravity wasn't the biggest problem anymore. The wind was. The obvious answer was modern navigation, military-grade GPS, precision avionics. But wars don't wait for procurement. Those systems would have taken months. India had days. So an Air Force engineer walked into an ordinary electronics shop, bought a civilian hiking GPS and carried it back to the hangar. The ground crew taped it onto the dashboard of a fighter jet. Sometimes history gets written with a technology that was never built for the job. There was just one problem though. That GPS had never been designed for a fighter jet. It was designed for hikers, for someone walking through a forest, not a mirage flying close to the speed of sound. By the time the screen finished updating, the aircraft was already hundreds of meters ahead of what it showed. And remember, these pilots could not cross the line of control, not even by accident. The GPS couldn't show it in real time. The pilots couldn't see it either. One delayed update, one wider turn, 1 second. That's all it would have taken to turn a navigation lag into an international crisis. The GPS didn't make the mission easy. It just made it possible. But while engineers were solving that problem inside a hangar, another team was trying to solve one inside a prison cell. For Flight Lieutenant Nachiket, the war had stopped. At least, that's how it looked. No aircrafts, no mountains, no radio calls, only waiting. Questions, uncertainty. But outside that cell, the war was becoming something far more dangerous. Nachiket's release wasn't won inside a cockpit. It wasn't won on a mountain either. It happened through diplomacy, back-channel negotiations, international pressure, the Red Cross. While soldiers fought for territory, a second war was being fought for time. Wars aren't fought only by soldiers. Some are fought by diplomats, negotiators, international organizations, governments trying desperately to stop two nuclear powers from making one mistake they could never take back. By the end of May, the entire world was watching Kargil. That international attention changed every mission after it. Every bomb had to destroy the target without escalating the war, without crossing the line of control, without losing global support. Which raised a harder question. If the enemy had hidden across an entire mountain range, how do you even find it? The answer began with something almost invisible, a few footprints in the snow. While the pilots kept flying, another team was looking at photographs, thousands of them. Because before India could break Pakistan's supply lines, it had to answer one question. Where exactly were they? The mountains didn't give up their secrets easily. Every ridge looked the same. Every shadows looked suspicious. Every rock looked like it could be a bunker. So the analysts stopped searching for the bunkers. They started searching for people. Not the people themselves. The traces they couldn't help leaving behind. Then someone noticed them. A line of faint mule tracks, almost invisible, appearing from nowhere and disappearing behind one ordinary cluster of rocks. That was the clue. Every supply convoy ended there. Those rocks weren't hiding soldiers. They were hiding Pakistan's biggest logistics base, Munthod Halo. India hadn't found a bunker. It had found the heartbeat of the entire operation. The strike lasted minutes. Its impact lasted the rest of the war. Fuel, ammunition, food, shelter, months of preparation, gone in a single pass. Roughly 300 Pakistani soldiers were killed, the single deadliest airstrike of the entire war. After Munthod Halo, Pakistan wasn't just defending mountain peaks anymore. It was fighting without a reliable lifeline. But India still had one problem left to solve. Destroying a supply camp was one thing. Destroying a bunker carved in solid rocks was another. Unguided bombs could level an open supply camp. They couldn't reliably crack a bunker carved in solid rocks. Missing by 20 meters was same as missing completely. India didn't just need more bombs, it needed precision. And the answer arrived from Israel. Lightning Laser Designation Pods. The Netflix series shows their arrival. What happened next never made it to the screen. The pod worked. The Mirage also worked. But together, they didn't. Because the pod spoke one distal language and the Mirage avionics spoke another. And nobody had ever connected the two before. There was no manual, no software update, no foreign expert flying in with instructions. So Indian engineers built the bridge themselves. Inside a secure hangar, working non-stop for 48 straight hours, they wrote an interface that had never existed before. The final piece of a 12-day scramble to get precision weapons into the war. Then came the test. Wing Commander Raghunath Nambiar took off. If the software failed, the mission failed. On June 24th, the laser locked. Bomb corrected its own path through the crosswinds that had haunted every mission before it. And for the first time, the Indian Air Force struck exactly where it meant to. That wasn't just a successful airstrike. It was the birth of precision air warfare inside the IAF. But by then, someone else had already begun deciding how this war would end. By late June, something had changed. The mountains looked exactly the same. The fighting hadn't stopped. Indian soldiers were still climbing impossible slopes. Pilots were still flying combat missions. But Pakistan had a new problem. Its supply routes were collapsing. Its command posts were no longer safe. And every passing day, holding those peaks was becoming more expensive than losing them. Then, on July 4th, the war quietly moved 5,000 miles away, to Washington. Most people remember Tiger Hill. Very few remember this meeting. But history often changes inside rooms that never heard a single gunshot. Nawaz Sharif agreed to withdraw Pakistani forces, not because of a peace treaty, not because of a surrender, because the battlefield and international pressure had left almost no other choice. Long before the last bullet was fired, the outcome had already been decided. But the pilots didn't know that yet. They still had missions to fly, soldiers to protect, mountains to reclaim. Wars don't end when politicians shake hands. They end when the last aircraft comes home. When people remember Operation Safed Sagar, they remember the pilots. And they should. Courage deserves to be remembered. But courage was never fighting alone. Behind every sortie stood engineers writing software that didn't exist yet. Ground crews building solutions no manual had ever described. photo analysts finding an entire army from footprints in the snow, and commanders learning faster than the battlefield could throw new problems at them. Operation Safed Sagar didn't just help India win Kargil, it changed how India fights. From these mountains to Balakot, its legacy still flies with every mission. Because wars aren't won inside cockpits alone, they are won by engineers, analysts, diplomats, soldiers, and pilots. This was the story beyond the cockpit. If stories of crime, power, corruption, and the people who escape justice matter to you, subscribe to Dark Decoded. New deep dives every week.